This is Blacklisted News Radio. Welcome. It's the 27th day of July 2013. My name is Doug Owen, and it's good to be with you. Welcome. I'm the senior editor of BlacklistedNews.com. That's where you can find all of the articles that we'll be talking about on the show throughout the duration of this 2-hour live broadcast. You can follow us on Twitter at BLN Radio, and of course via the news feed at Blacklisted News. You can also keep up with the show. We have a website dedicated to it. People are already there hanging out. It's BlackListedRadio.com, appropriately named. All of the amenities and accoutrements that you need to be part of it are there for your pleasure. iTunes, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, and soon to be on the iHeartRadio app. It is everywhere. So no reason not to listen to the show. A lot of stuff to get into today. We're going to be talking about Detroit, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Iraq. It's totally screwed. Let's see. I mean, there's a lot of things to really cover today. So many things in the technological realm that are bringing us more closer to the government in a lot of different ways. Of course, Big Brother always watching, and some of the new toys that they have. Well, we're going to discuss them. But first, let's talk about oil. Almost everything that you see happening in the world around you depends on oil. The price of oil can change the price that you pay at the grocery store for daily use items. We could sit here and talk about it for an hour, all of the different things that the price of oil affects. But, lucky for all of us, these somewhat unwinnable wars in the Middle East would not have to be fought if there was more oil. It's really this idea of scarcity that has brought the military apparatus to full swing in the Middle East. And I think that people across the aisle will agree that oil wars are what we are seeing in the Middle East, and they are expanding into the region. Now, the Caspian Sea State region, the Silk Road, and now it's more about gas pipelines. So energy wars, energy resources, all of that is always a big issue. Now, when there is strife and uncertainty in the Egyptian government, you pay more at the pump. Why? Because there's problems. I mean, they don't really have to explain why. And we're going to talk about a lot of manipulation that has happened. I've got a jam-packed show, but there is this huge oil discovery. I think it's worth mentioning because it's the biggest in 50 years, and whether this changes our foreign and domestic policy, that remains to be seen. Whether or not this is actually true, I've got my reservations. I mean, there's a lot of wildcatters and people that claim to have the oil under the ground, but until you see it popping out of the crust of the earth, it's a whole nother thing. I mean, there's plenty of places that there's lots and lots of oil under the Arctic. We imagine they have speculated and geo-surveyed much of that to the effect that now it's being quite militarized and quite contested between the United States and Russia. That's going to be an ongoing meme. But basically in South Australia, conveniently in a badland where there's almost nobody there, they have found the biggest oil discovery in 50 years. 3.5 billion barrels of oil are under the ground. That's 65,000 square kilometers of land that is in the Arkaringa Basin. This basically breaks down to 233 billion barrels of recoverable oil in the area, and roughly, according to today's prices, that's worth $20 trillion. Woo! Now, it's pretty convenient that the United States has been moving more and more military equipment to Australia. Coincidence? Maybe. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt, but it seems that the renewed focus on Asia and, of course, the Trans-Pacific lands right there on the continent. So, these oil discoveries we hear about a lot. There was a huge one in Cuba just a few years ago, maybe not even that long. And, yeah, you find this oil, and I guess that kind of changes the dynamic maybe the focus, the shift, but I think it's very relevant looking at what we have today. So let's just move forward, and whether they get the $20 trillion dollars worth of oil, whether that collapses the peak oil industry or renews this lust, this love that we have for petrochemicals in this country. Remember, it's not just engines that run off of oil. Just about everything we have today is built or created from petroleum products. Plastics are a perfect example of this. So when we think about oil, we think about Iraq. At least I do. I don't know if you've seen some of the horrific, gory pictures of those wells on fire from the invasion, the two invasions of Iraq. Iraq is in total shambles, and it is decimated. And unfortunately, the focus and the reason that the people in that country are suffering the way that they are is because they are above oil. Let's be honest about it. God rules all. Gold, oil, drugs. And now they have more drugs in Iraq. The country's in shambles, but now they have a vibrant and healthy opium production economy, just like their friends Afghanistan and other regional partners to the United States and the oligarchy. But that really does just highlight how things have transformed. It's a total mess. Since April, get a load of this. Since April, you might not have heard about this in the headlines, violence has surged. More than 3,000 people have died just since April. There was this huge escape, which we should talk about for a moment, the Abu Ghraib prison break. Remember Abu Ghraib? Most Americans remember it because of the pictures with the young lady giving the thumbs up as they were torturing and touching and, lots of really disgusting and horrific things were being done to the prisoners, and they took photos of them. So let's just, if you're not familiar, if you've been living under a rock or maybe just not in this country and don't really care about what's happening in Abu Ghraib, it's important to note that, I don't know, all of the fighting that we've done and all of the billions of dollars, if not, actually in Iraq, trillions, $6 trillion we've spent, you would think that at least we would have rounded up and got some of those bad guys and the head leaders of Al-Qaeda out of the country. You would think that they'd be tortured somewhere and probably Gitmo, dangerous top head honcho types in the Al-Qaeda, wink, wink, quote-unquote organization. But just to bring you up to speed, here's what the mainstream media, this via the Huffington Post, said about it, which is, I think it's accurate.
There's been a massive prison break at Abu Ghraib. And according to authorities in Iraq, a deadly raid on the high-security prison resulted in hundreds of convicts escaping, including senior members of Al-Qaeda. And unfortunately, it's not the first time that something like this has happened. We saw, similar instance in Afghanistan as well, where hundreds of prisoners were released out of a prison there. But, Abu Ghraib now is no longer under American control. It is under Iraqi control. And apparently, the suicide bombers drove cars packed with explosives up to the gates of the prison and then blasted their way into the compound while gunmen attacked the guards with mortars and rocket-propelled grenades. And they even tried this at another prison in Iraq where they had fought against the guards, but there none of the prisoners did escape. But I can imagine that this is not going to be a welcome sign in terms of, hoping for things to simmer down.
Simmering down, probably not going to happen there at all. Now, I think it's interesting because apparently these top-notch prisons that we helped build and secure in Iraq are not all that top-notch, and you and a couple of yahoos filling your cars, your minivans with dynamite can get through and bust out 500 of the most bad boy archetype Al-Qaeda terrorists that you can imagine. Well, that's a big, unfortunate kick in the face to most of those people out there that have the misconception that we're actually fighting a winnable war in Iraq and that, anything positive or good is going to come out of that intervention. So 3,000 dead, the violence continues, There's a complete failure that needs to be noted here. We have the NSA, the Big Brother apparatus, watching us 24 hours a day. We're going to be talking about that more in depth as we move forward in the podcast, but it's notable that this is a complete intelligence failure of epic proportions. If there's any place that should be monitored, if there's any place that we should have surveillance, you would imagine that it would be 24/7 on a place like this, considering the high-profile characters that are imprisoned there. No. We're going to be worrying about what Doug Owen and maybe his grandmother are chit-chatting about on Skype. That's a big priority. That they're building huge multi-billion-dollar bunkers in places like Utah and around the world to keep all of that very valuable data. And, it goes on and on and on. I just am kind of dumbfounded by the disconnect most people have between these epic failures and what we're seeing in foreign policy and things that are being suggested in places like Syria. So, we'll go back to the Middle East here, but I do want to talk a little bit more about oil, and oil brings us to Detroit, and Detroit is not doing so well. It has become the constitutional crisis that we all thought it would when the the city bankrupted. Now, they're not paying. They don't have the money. They're looking for money. Rand Paul this week said no bailout. Of course, Barack Obama already bailed out Detroit. They just didn't bail out the people. They bailed out General Motors. And we'll get to General Motors. But Detroit by the numbers, Zero Hedge collated some of this data, and I think it's pretty important to just kind of look at the scenario that we have in Detroit, because it is an epic failure on the part of government. And let's be honest, the people having a complete disconnect with reality, continuing to vote for people and legislation and government-funded bond projects that really just screwed the pooch, and all of that culminating into more and more bad decisions has put Detroit into a spiral, not to mention the fact that they have been completely abandoned in all of the federal assistance that this once great city received. Went wayward along with General Motors to Japan. So with the Detroit bankruptcy hearing underway this week, constitutional crisis notwithstanding, thought it would be useful, Zero Hedge, to cut through the rhetoric, break down the mutually assured destruction barriers, and peer into the cold, hard facts as the city looks to reconstruct and restructure its $18 billion debt. I think it's a good idea as well. $18 billion, Detroit's estimated debt obligations. So they owe $18 billion, $11.9 billion, city's unsecured obligations to lenders and retirees. So these are people that have borrowed money from probably the retirees via their unsecured obligations. At some point, that's who is ultimately going to be bailed in this scenario. I think $6.4 billion is what the city's obligations, backed by enterprise revenues, revenue bonds. Not exactly sure what those are, but that's a lot of money to create revenue generating bonds that maybe they have invested in. Let's see, 38 cents of every tax dollar that the city collects goes to service legacy debt and other obligations rather than providing services for the city's residents and businesses. That sounds about right. 38% of the money that is being pulled from the people's pockets forcibly is not going into anything that is actually providing a service currently for those people. It's paying pensions, it's paying off things in the past, and doing right by the debts and by the obligations of the city. So when you move to Detroit, and you might want to, because you can buy, a $2,800 100 square foot home for a few $1,000s. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity in Detroit. Don't get me wrong. When some people see collapse, I see opportunity. When people say that it's totally decimated, I think about, well, has it hit the bottom? Because if it's hit the bottom, there's nowhere to go up or to go up but up. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm the consummate optimist in a lot of ways. $115 million Detroit's negative cash flows to the fiscal year 2012. That's not good. 8% interest accrued on Detroit's deferred payment of pension fund contributions. I mean, we get the idea. They're really heavily leveraged, and they owe a lot of money to not only the people that they have borrowed money from, but the retirees and other people in government. Currently, it's quite the quagmire because you have an economy that is built upon a huge tax revenue base, and all of a sudden, in the last few years, it has been decimated. Everyone's looking for somebody to blame in this scenario, and what it comes down to is that, honestly, there is no quick solution. Now, if they allow, and this is against the state constitution, but if they allow the city of Detroit to bankrupt, this will be precedent-setting. It'll be very similar to the Cyprus situation. We've seen some smaller cities in California fail, and they've dipped into their CAFRs, which are the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report funds, and have started paying debts. But this is definitely the largest city, and so everybody's looking for somebody to blame, and it's just about par for the course when you look at almost any city's budget and how they operate. Where I live currently, you have a very similar situation. The only difference is that you don't have a mass exodus of 10,000 people. If anything, where I live, you have a mass importation of new citizens ready to pay taxes to the state and to buy homes and to look for new opportunities. And it's overly simple. Jobs, 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 jobs. We remember Nancy Pelosi. She said we needed to vote for jobs. Everybody needs jobs. Well, if there's no jobs, people aren't going to hang out. They're not going to live there. They're not going to be able to exist in a place like Detroit. So what's happening in Detroit is that you're seeing the ruralization, if you will, the reforestization of the area. They're bulldozing homes. Tens of thousands, if not probably 20,000 plus, have been just broken down and bulldozed. They got the D9 out there and just tore these blighted areas down. A lot of people freak out about that and look at Agenda 21 and say, well, look at this. They're turning these into UN biodiversity zones. That it didn't actually happen. And, not to, I guess, give any credit to this, the government and what they've done there, but at some point you have a huge problem. And these are unique problems because we have seen the outsourcing and the selling out of the American people. People blame it on unions. Unions have driven these companies out of this country, and the tax loopholes that George Bush and many others before him gave these companies, not to mention the bailouts that Barack Obama and the current regime gave General Motors, have been nothing less than a total push and a final death nail in the city of Detroit. So, I mean, it's very symbolic, and people want this bailout. Why? I don't understand why you would give the city money. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not one of these cold, callous people, although I did get quite a bit of criticism for the last show because of my thoughts on Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. Maybe we'll go there in a moment, but this becomes another race-baited issue for many people when it comes to what's happening in Detroit. And when you look at the social construct that has been created around these industries, yeah, the industry's left. Is it a combination of all of that? I wouldn't blame the unions nearly as much as others would, because it's really they have to deal with other considerations in other countries like Japan or even China when dealing with workers. So I think that the companies would be more than happy to operate in this country if they could do it at a cheaper price. So that's what it really comes down to. Energy costs, those kind of things going up will make imports less desirable, and we're going to get right there. So what is some of the other things that we can take away from Detroit? There's a lot of stuff here. You have TPP, which has really destroyed the whole infrastructure, because all of these huge corporations that once operated, especially the auto industry in Detroit, are now moving into Japan and competing with Japanese cars. If you look at the number of inflows from Japan as to the imports, it is pretty sad. They're not importing nearly as many GM products as they are exporting their cars. And actually, you can't find a whole lot of coverage on what's happening in the shadow government behind closed doors. And this is what's not being talked about on the mainstream media, which is very frustrating, because this is where the conversation lies. This is actually from Breaking Views. It's a Reuters TV show, and the host here is asking really hard questions about these secret agreements that are happening in the shadows. By the way, I think it's notable. Just want to throw that out there for your own research purposes. This week we had Bohemian Grove and the Trilateral Commission's meetings, annual meetings. So those two things are always notable. The protests that go along with it. So I just want to throw that out there. I don't have a lot of the coverage, but this is your government. This is the real government. All of the crap that you see on the TV, for the most part, politicians and Barack Obama telling you about the different plans, those are kind of important because there's messaging in these speeches, because there is a lot of truth that you can get out of these people between the headlines and between their sentences, between their teeth. Every once in a while, a little bit of truth escapes, but for the most part, it's hard to find people that are talking about the shadow government, the real movers and shakers that are determining the fate of Detroit and how much you pay at the pump, all of these things that really do matter to the American people. And let's be honest, the public has no idea whatsoever that these things are happening. So this will bring us up to speed if you want to know about the currency war and what's happening. And I think it's very, very telling because you hear all of this rhetoric about what these other rogue nations are doing, the kamikaze easing that we're seeing with the yen and the Central Bank of Japan. But they kind of break this down pretty well here. So
Japanese negotiators have joined the Trans-Pacific Partnership talks in Malaysia this week, Andy, swelling the ranks of free trade negotiating countries to 12. First off, big picture, isn't this supposed to be the domain of the WTO here? Why is the TPP the new venue for free trade talks?
Well, yes, the first best option any day would be to get a trade deal done at the WTO level. But as you know, WTO has 159 members, and they can only agree to disagree, which is what they have been doing with the Doha round for the last 12 years. And there is really no hope for a WTO agreement, a fresh WTO agreement on trade until at least 2020. But it is time to move the global commerce agenda forward, and this is what TPP does.
All right, with Japan stepping in here now, what is...
So this is kind of important because the World Trade Organization should be... let me turn those monitors down. The World Trade Organization is operating with most of the nations, but not the BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China are not members of the World Trade Organization. So that's why TPP is unique in that sense.
What does this mean for the auto sector, for example?
Yes, auto sector. Well, the big three U.S. automakers sell fewer cars in a year in Japan than Japanese automakers sell in the United States in a day. So Detroit will look for some concessions on the non-tariff barriers on the protected Japanese auto market, but that is not going to move the needle on the U.S. current account deficit with Japan.
Notice that this is all under the guise of free trade, no tariffs, no barriers, being able to tax. Other than the taxiing of those cars to the United States, that's really the only cost that goes into the shipment. So I think it's really important because when you look at the taxes and the tariffs, they're not tariffs, but they are taxes and other barriers that you have in places like Detroit. There's actually less reasons to build businesses and economies in this country than there is in Japan. So it's more than obvious. So this is the real debate. This is what's really happening on the floor in these secret negotiations that are happening between countries with our elected and non-elected policymakers speaking on behalf of every person in this country and respective countries in the TPP agreement.
And of course, although a Ford Fiesta sells for $10,000 more in Japan than it does in the United States, given a weak yen, it's not that American car manufacturers are suddenly going to become very much more competitive in Japan, even if the trade barriers there were to come down.
Well, let's bring in the yen there. You know, we hear a lot of grumblings from the U.S. about currency manipulation and how that might be brought in via a clause in TPP. But is that a realistic scenario, do you think?
No, that's not at all a realistic scenario because remember, there is nothing different that Japan has done here, different from what the United States has done. And Japanese position vis-a-vis the currency is that they are not seeking a weaker yen for mercantile reasons. They are only trying to reflate their deflated economy.
See, you like that? Not mercantile reasons, not to get those prices lower so that you can get that Honda for $2,000 less than you're paying today. It's because they want to reinflate their economy. So you can check this out. I'll put it at Blacklisted Radio in the show notes. But that's really important to understand is these are the discussions. This is what is really holding Detroit in the balance. Yeah, there's a lot of bad politicians, policymakers, and the non-voting majority is being screwed. But at some point, when all the people move away, they will have to put their feet to the fire. They will have to face the firing squad and figure out what they're going to do. The ultimate question is, are you going to pay for it as a person that doesn't live in Detroit? Are you going to have to take on that obligation? Maybe not. The latest Chinese investment craze is downtown Detroit housing. Home values have plummeted. Vacancies abound. The foreclosure numbers are through the roof. Not that that's all that surprising considering, but you have these Chinese, many of which are criminals, that are trying to find ways to get rid of their money. They're saying, well, hey, man, I mean, America has to be better than China. China, they have these huge unfinished and unoccupied cities. If you've seen them on Google Maps, they're pretty impressive. And it's amazing how you could build something, and if you don't have humans occupying buildings, that they just immediately are grown over, and the elements and the earth take these homes and these ideas and dreams back to the earth with them. But the Chinese are saying, hey, this is not a bad idea. If I could buy a 2,500 square foot home for $4,000, why not? So what's funny about that is that these investors buy these homes. Not only are they going to be helping out the local economy, but they're going to be taxpayers as well. You can't just buy a home. You have to pay taxes on that home. And who knows what that will be. Although I don't know if you're going to be getting too many services, which, I mean, if you don't want to see any cops, that's a good thing. Anyway, the video there spoke to the currency rules and what's happening there, and China's not at all impressed with TPP because it does enable many of their next-door neighbor foes, Japan, Taiwan, and other contested regions, areas, and economies that they would like to have under the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So they're not a big factor in this. The World Trade Organization, interestingly enough, is being pushed out of the way. A lot of the World Trade Organization, I think this heavy regulation and many of these people that are not friendly with mercantilism, they're people are including the U.S. government and these Asian nations, Australia included, are trying to kind of backdoor the World Trade Organization. Same thing with China and the yuan. Now talking about or at least putting out the rumors that they're going to be backing this new world reserve currency with gold. Sounds pretty exciting, doesn't it? So who's lobbying for these currency rules? Who's out there working on behalf of making sure that the Chinese don't up themselves a peg? It's none other than the Chrysler Group. Yes, we spent a lot of money on the Chrysler Group, and guess what? They still owe us, depending on who you ask, $8 to $18 billion. So, yeah, we could have bailed out the people. Not that I'm a bailout queen. Not that I'm a corporate welfare whore. I'm just saying that if you're going to bail out people, that's one of the better ways to do it. Also, it's really interesting. Eminent domain has come up in this equation when it comes to Detroit, and we'll move forward to more exciting things like George Alexander Louis. Detroit's 60-year decline, culminating in its recent bankruptcy, has many causes, but one that should not be ignored is the city's extensive use of eminent domain to transfer property to politically influential private interests. For many years, Detroit aggressively used eminent domain to promote quote-unquote economic development and quote-unquote urban renewal. I love those buzzwords. The most notorious example of this was in 1981, the Polton case, in which some 4,000 people lost their homes and numerous businesses were forced to move in order to make way for General Motors factories. So people that had homes in Detroit that were living there happily were paid absolutely pennies on the dollar and basically had their homes stolen from them because of GM. Well, it only takes a decade or generation or two to forget all of those bad things that have happened and all of those people that were wronged because, well, when you're paying union people $50 an hour, I mean, how many other things aren't so right when that happens? So that's only 4,000 people that lost their homes or 4,000 homes. So I don't know how many people are in the average home back then, probably a lot more than today. Anyway, in his, let's see. As explained in the article, and this is at the New American, by the way, and we have a link to that at blacklistednews.com. It breaks down how the Michigan Supreme Court basically used eminent domain and has used it so much that they have really displaced many of their tried and true and loyal residents. I mean, think about that for a moment. You built this economy around these industries. They actually sold out their own people, the Detroitians, to General Motors just 50, 60 years back. So it's interesting to see how many of these central planning gurus have contributed to the destruction of the infrastructure of Detroit, displacing hardworking Americans, bringing in all of these half-cocked ideas and, well, now failed businesses that have sold out those people. Well, it sucks. And I don't really have a solution for Detroit, and I think that when you have something that is built around a business, the company town, throughout history, we've seen them fall and fail. Plenty of examples of ports and railroad cities that the car, that technology, that highways made antiquated and destroyed. And so we don't cry for all of the cities that the highways destroyed. We don't cry for all of the cities that left when the train tracks came. We don't cry for all of those economic changes and losses anymore because, number one, we don't remember our history. Number two, because it didn't have that huge of an impact. Now in Detroit, where you have millions of people living, there is a huge impact. Anyway, let's move forward. We have something to cherish. Let's not remember all of the bad things that happened in Detroit. Let's not think about eminent domain. Let's all fawn over the newborn king. And if you didn't hear about it, we have a new royal, a new lizard person. His name is George Alexander Louis, and he is the moon baby. Red Ice did a great write-up, Red Ice Creations, that is, on the moon baby. But they write, and it's pretty funny because I asked the question on Twitter about people's impression and how many people, other people besides myself, wondered if the Antichrist had been born this week. And I think it's an honest question. Okay, when you look at how many evil things have been done by the monarchy, you have to wonder. And many people are. I kind of say it tongue-in-cheek, but it wouldn't surprise me if he is the devil personified. He is the gateway to the netherworld. It wouldn't surprise me. A lot of people are offended by just asking the question. I can't believe you would ask that question, Doug. It's a royal baby. It's a royal baby. Anyway, they gave him a power name, according to what I've read, and that's why they went with Louis Alexander, George Alexander Louis, that is, and that's pretty powerful. He's got a lot of great names in there. How many kings have been Louis, and how many Alexander the Greats have there been? You can delve into that yourself. But anyway, great hordes waited with anticipatory fervor as the celeb royal Kate Middleton, a.k.a. the Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, gave birth to the baby boy and the future heir of the British throne, continuing Britain's chain of royals that seem to entrance the world with their influence and celebrity. It's true. People love them. And I don't know if it's really that the American people love them, but the American media loves them. They become this show, this fairy tale. They've become everything that you saw in Disney, but has manifested in the physical world. Oh, they're princesses. Ooh, they're kings. How cool is this? Now, when you go and look at real power and real kings and how they treat their subjects, not like these people. I mean, they're just, they could be paid actors for all it would matter. Not. They just, give their little waves and ride around in the parades with their fancy little outfits on. I mean, it's really quite silly when you look at them. But anyway, the baby boy child was reportedly born via natural birth on the 22nd of July, 2013. You were probably waiting with bated breath, chewing your fingernails, watching the TV that would talk about nothing but this. I turned it off for 2 days because I was not in anticipatory fervor for the newborn king. This month's full moon falls one day after July's lunar perigee, which is the moon's closest point to the Earth for the monthly orbit. Astronomers will call this full moon a peerage full moon, but everyone else will call it the super moon. It's an interesting occurrence considering that the baby's father, Prince William, if you didn't know this is kind of an interesting nugget, was born on the summer solstice, June 21st, 1982. And if you just go and throw that date into the search engine of your choice, you'll find that it was a lunar eclipse, a solar eclipse that he was born into. The baby's mother, Kate, was born during a total lunar eclipse the same year, January 9th, 1982, and sometimes referred to as the Solstice King and his Lunar Queen. So, he was born during an eclipse, and so was she. What a coincidence. I know. I mean, that just reinvigorates people to wonder about, how magical are these people? They're born on these special days. And, there's a lot of astrology and astrotheology that goes into these relationships. And, of course, their birthing practices. Most people are just, so excited about all of the little outfits and things that they're going to put on the baby that they don't really look at this. And I find this to be much more interesting. So you have two people, a king and a queen, the sun and the moon, and now there is another moon baby. For those wondering if the marriage of Prince William and Kate Middleton is fated, defying all odds, it's true. The remarkable birth of Prince William on a solar eclipse meeting of the sun and moon on the summer solstice has dazzled many astrologers for years, as this reflects the solstice king of the old myths of the UK. When studying the chart of Kate, lo and behold, she was born on the lunar eclipse just after the winter solstice in the same year as Will's. Wow, that's a humdinger. What are the odds? How did that happen? Is this not all foretold? Is this not all prepackaged and planned? Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Makes you wonder. I mean, how could all those things just be random occurrences? Too phenomenal to be random occurrences. So anyway, Red Eyes had some other links, a lot of them, and we linked it up at blacklistednews.com. You can check out the Moon Baby, or just Google Moon Baby, and you'll find a lot of stuff on that. But I think it's pretty interesting that they go to all of these links to make sure these specific things happen. And you have to wonder, does that attribute to the power that they wield? Does that attribute to their ability to remain in control for decades, thousands of years, on and on and on, inevitably for infinity? Is that the trick? Could you channel that yourself? Could you do something to this effect? Could you use these same powers to make yourself royal? I don't know. So let's talk about Syria real quickly here, because Syria has definitely got pushed to the back pages. And this week, General Dempsey, as well as John McCain, and the whole crew, the whole regime have been talking about different options in the region. What are we going to do? Should we arm these rebels? Some of them are Al-Qaeda. The Russians, they're not thrilled with the idea. But, and who would be? It's not a great idea to, give heavy weapons, long weapons to the Syrian rebels, considering who some of them may be. I mean, we just had this huge prison break in Iraq. How many of those Al-Qaeda generals and upper echelon are on their way to Syria to go and get some guns from the CIA? Well, yeah. That ends up being my question. Let's see. So we've got an update on the rebels, and, these are the modern-day freedom fighters that we have in Syria that everybody's so excited about. PBS brings us up to speed on what's happening here.
Syrian rebels continue to wage a new northern offensive today, warning civilians off a road that serves as a crucial supply route for regime forces. Here in the United States, officials reconsidered their options for how to support the rebels against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
I have no crystal ball here to predict when Assad will go.
At the White House today, Press Secretary Jay Carney reaffirmed the administration's position that the Syrian president is on his way out and that President Obama will continue to support the opposition.
The president's commitment will continue, and he believes we need to continue to step up our assistance because of the imperative that Assad not be allowed to essentially murder an entire nation.
Wow, murder an entire nation. Is that what Assad's doing? I'm not an Assad fan, but I don't know if they're murdering of a whole nation. And how many of those people are actually nationals, and how many of them are just new imports, new citizens on the scene, new private mercenary contractors? That's really the question, Jay Carney. But this guy wiggles like a worm. I mean, he's a paid liar and actor, not very good at it. I mean, it's funny because he won't say that the Egyptian coup happened, because then we wouldn't be able to give them all that money and all of those weapons. And we should just mention the fact that the IMF is now reneged on that big loan that we talked about last Saturday on the podcast. So things are changing. There's more and more pressure. And as things deteriorate in the Middle East, it's going to be more comical to watch the press hole for the Barack Obama regime, Mr. Jay Carney here, wiggle around these words. It's time for Assad to go, but we're just waiting for him to go. What does that even mean? Well, it's a very benign way of saying that we're ousting him, that we are trying to plot and assassinate him. I mean, pick your term, pick whatever way you want to describe what the United States is doing in the region, and you will find that Jay Carney can somehow justify it.
Talk of stepped-up assistance came after the release of a letter written by General Martin Dempsey, America's highest-ranking military officer, outlining the Pentagon's options for going beyond humanitarian aid. Addressed to Senate Armed Services Chair Carl Levin, it listed 5 options: training, assisting, and advising the opposition forces, conducting limited air and missile strikes against Assad targets, establishing and enforcing a no-fly zone, using air and ground forces to set up buffer zones to protect the borders of Turkey and Jordan, and using a combination of special operations forces and ground forces to take control of Syria's chemical weapons stockpiles. Dempsey wrote that these operations could involve thousands of U.S. troops, cost billions of dollars, and that the use of force would constitute, quote, no less than an act of war. And he warned, once we take action, we should be prepared for what comes next. Deeper involvement is hard to avoid.
Okay, so here we are, and these things are all very valid. It's very true. Look at Iraq. It's going to be a slam dunk. It's only going to take us a few days. It's only going to cost a few $1 million. We're going to use their oil revenues to pay for it. I mean, I've beat this drum over and over again. So what can you say? Well, if it's not a grand conspiracy, if it's not a war crime, then it's just a miscalculation. It's a bad plan. It didn't work out. It was bad budgeting. Well, at least General Dempsey's not an idiot, and they're not going to lay this on his feet. Hey, this is going to cost billions of dollars, and we're going to have to be there for the duration. Look at what's happening in Iraq. We've pulled out of Iraq, and it's a complete mess. So, and not that I'm for interventionism. I'm just saying that when you create a puppet proxy government, statistically and historically, you have to have a lot of military involvement and a lot of money going towards keeping that and propping that up for years to come. It is a deep, long-term involvement. Otherwise, you're just blowing things up. And that's what General Dempsey articulated. These are acts of war. This is just, I guess, so frustrating to me because people think, well, this isn't really war. We're just helping these nice freedom fighter type people and giving them money and Band-Aids and shit. No, this is war. This is absolutely war. And there's no way that you can finger F your way out of saying that it's war. Okay? There's no humanitarian aid angle that you can take when you are providing heavy weaponry, rocket pelt grenades, things that we consider to be weapons of mass destruction, okay, RPGs, weapons of mass destruction. Let's go ahead and do what the government does and amp it up to the nth degree, okay? They're helping people take pressure cookers and blow up buildings in Syria. That is terrorism. That is all of the things that we hear that are wrong, evil, and felonious. They'll land you in prison for a lifetime of torture in this country. All of those things are acts of war, and they are going to and have been being conducted under our discretion. We know that there are thousands of people on the ground. And I want to continue with this because we have a new revelation about Syria. Things have definitely changed, and no one's talking about this yet, but let's just look at McCain. I think McCain pops in here. He doesn't like this because General Dempsey is giving a real honest assessment, and it's hard to sell people on the truth, right? It would be better if he just said, oh, yeah, it's going to be a slam dunk, and it's not going to cost us anything, because that is more politically popular. It's easier for McCain and the other warhawk neocon assholes to sell.
The discussion of U.S. options comes as the Syrian conflict enters its third year, with more than 93,000 people already dead and millions of refugees displaced in and around Syria. Opposition forces have lost ground over the past 6 months, and some have wondered whether lethal support may be too late in coming. Even so, the Washington Post reported today
lethal
that
support.
The House and Senate Intelligence
What is
Committees
lethal support, okay? Oh, the way that they phrase this. You got to love it. I mean, it's lethal support. We're going to offer you lethal support. Okay.
last week approved Obama administration plans to ship weapons to the rebels through the CIA.
All right, so there you go. The CIA shipping weapons, and they're already on the ground. And they've already been doing this, and all of this heavy weaponry and equipment that they got from the, that they got from Benghazi. They're probably getting from Iraq, with it shipping in weapons. And Iran and Hezbollah, which is now a terrorist organization. Did you hear about that? The elected leaders in Lebanon are now all terrorists. It's a nice little designation change. That way that they can justify killing them. And believe you me, I'm not a Hezbollah freedom fighter, and I'm not for a theocracy or a secular, crazy, wild government that rules over and beats people for being bad Muslims or being a woman. I'm not for that, but the sad reality is that we being the United States of America and the empire, usually support and give money, comfort, and aid to the most radicalized, crazy nutbags. And let's just remember that Mr. Ronald Reagan himself had the Mujahideen to the White House. So it's very interesting to note that the rebel commanders are going to be visiting the United States. That came out of Reuters this week. They're going to be offering them room and board. They'll be staying at the White House, checking it out. And I'm sure we're going to have some great pictures that will live on in infamy with Mr. Barack Obama, just like presidents before him, Ronald Reagan, meeting with terrorists and talking about how they are the new founding fathers. Well, people have forgotten exactly what happened in Syria. Where did it go wrong? What happened? Why did this start? How did it start? Well, what happened was, allegedly, the Bashar al-Assad regime, putting down protests, popular uprisings by students, ordered the police, the Syrian police, to go and execute, beat, kill, depending on your version of the story. They were forced to aggress against their own Syrian brothers and sisters, and thus they rejected, revolted, and started the Free Syrian Army. And you're like, wow, that's pretty convenient. These guys all had this whole plan worked out. I mean, I look at the time and effort that I put into doing this radio show, this podcast. I spent a good 4 hours last night laying out everything so I can make sure that I would have all of my I's dotted and T's crossed when doing this. But so it seems very convenient to me that all of this would just pop up organically. Not to just give credit to how much time I put into the analysis, but just because it has to be a hell of an orchestrated event, and you have to have possibly thousands of people organizing to create something of this magnitude to take on a very well-established dictator, now elected leader, ostensibly according to himself, whatever. You're not going to hear a lot of great things about Bashar al-Assad out of me, But I am one of the few out there that will at least give him the benefit of the doubt, and I will always veer towards non-aggression because I see how over and over again what's being sold to us by people like John McCain is not the reality that General Dempsey is actually giving us when it comes to these issues. So it's very notable going back that now the World Tribune has posted this article. Thousands of Syrian police who joined the rebels are on the U.S. payroll. Dun, 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 dun. Shocker? Is it a shocker that the Syrian police, the rebels who joined the cause, thousands, okay, not hundreds, not tens, thousands of them are on the U.S. payroll. Officials said the administration of Barack Obama has approved tens of millions of dollars to pay the salaries of police officers who joined the rebels. They said the officers were working to maintain order in rebel-controlled territory, mostly in northern Syria. Man, that is a hell of a paid army. You have thousands of Syrian uniformed police officers that are on the CIA, Barack Obama, wherever you want to lay it, on the U.S.'s payroll. This is a hell of an omission. This is something that got no play in the mainstream media whatsoever. The World Tribune is quite renowned, and this is, I think, probably one of the biggest smoking guns in what's happening in Syria today. To find this out, quote, there are literally thousands of defected police inside of Syria, end quote. Assistant Secretary of the State Rick Barton said, quote, they are credible in their communities because they've defected. In an address to the Aspen Security Forum on July 19th, Barton, responsible for State Department stabilization operations, did not say how many Syrian police deserters were on the U.S. payroll, though he said the officers were receiving about $150 a month, which is a significant salary in Syria. So not only are they getting private mercenary contractor Syrian cop defectors on the U.S. payroll, but they're getting them for next to nothing, $150 a month. I mean, if you really think about it, most of you listening to this podcast could hire a Syrian cop to work for you. And, well, that is just a huge revelation in what's happening in Syria. Also, there are other big problems because most of these people are becoming disenfranchised. The $150 a month isn't quite what it used to be, I guess, because the disillusioned rebels are drifting back to take Assad's amnesty. So this week, according to The Telegraph and a few other big papers, and this is what's in contention, where we're really at with Syria and how far have we gone. The Telegraph had this piece about the West should prepare for Syria's victory. Con Coughlin, who's pretty famous, he's the Telegraph's defense editor. He's a world-renowned, self-proclaimed world-renowned expert on global security and terrorism issues. And he said, and this stirred up some pretty violent emotions on the internet. He basically said that the U.S. is screwed and the West and the British Empire is screwed when coming to what's happening in Syria. The only way to really fight this war, to beat Bashar al-Assad, is to go into full-scale war, and it's going to take more than the kinetic aspect. It's going to have to be a full-on ground invasion. And it's going to take a lot more manpower, money, and international attention than what happened in Libya. And so they're looking for the right revolution behind this. I don't know if it just hasn't panned out, but there's always rumors of defeat right before the surge, right before. So I don't know if I really buy into this, considering some of the other things that are happening. If they put these stories in the media telling us that, well, Bashar Assad is going to remain, this is going to give him, I think, if you were a PSYOP writer, a little bit of maybe false confidence in your actions. So I don't know if this is being placed in the Telegraph for that person or for that reason by Con Coughlin. I don't know if you should trust anybody with the first name Khan. But anyway, a lot of these rebels are drifting back because Assad has offered amnesty, and they have been at war for more than 2 years to no avail. Most of the educated youth, the college youth that well-educated college youth, I might add, that initially supported the ousting of Assad have looked at their counterparts and have looked at who is most interested in helping them, and it's the CIA and it's violent radical Islamists. And so most of these more westernized youth in Syria, moderates is a great way to describe them, are pretty much not supporting this any longer, and are actually moving back towards the Assad regime and getting amnesty and trying to get their lives back together. You can't blame them. I mean, what are you getting? You're getting assistance from the United States. I mean, that's only fun for a few years before that gets really old, and you realize, hey, the new guys are no better than the old guy, and at least the old guy's having elections. So, that's really changed a lot of the perception for many of the youth in Syria. So we'll see if this is going to be a turning point. I think, if anything, this has been one of the largest turning points in the war and in the popular debate here in the United States, with this debate happening. What happens in the future? If they want it, if they really want to do it, they're going to have to go full scale. And Dempsey's just kind of laid out those pragmatic plans to winning the war in Syria. If there is, otherwise we're just diddle-daddling. We're just throwing money into this and weaponry into this powder keg. All right, so let's talk about the shift in politics in this country, the United States of America, and all of our Western world, English-speaking cultures. 9/11 truth is something that is getting a lot more play. A lot more people are addressing conspiracy theories. And I'll play this clip because I think it's important, and the reaction by the average Joe on the street is what I find to be the most notable, and that is kind of this change in perception.
Driving around central Connecticut, it's hard to miss some of the graffiti popping up on bridges, overpasses, and road signs. 9/11 Truth, WTC, Building 7, all phrases scrawled across overpasses on some major highways. The State Department of Transportation is fed up with the graffiti, but doesn't have enough resources to keep up with it.
It's finite resources. There are a lot of needs out there, and there are limited funds.
And it's the taxpayers picking up the tab.
I would estimate that annually we spend probably $500,000 to $1 million dealing with graffiti.
But what does 9/11 Truth even mean, and who is climbing up onto these bridges to do it? Wayne Costi is a member of a group called the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He's not sure who the vandals are, but he does know about the message they're trying to spread.
The official story about what happened doesn't seem to add up.
Costi is a structural engineer who got involved with the group about 3 years ago to try to answer his own lingering questions about the science behind the building collapses on 9/11. As for what the Building 7 graffiti refers to,
and most people don't even know that a third major skyscraper was destroyed on September 11th.
Building 7 wasn't hit by a plane, but collapsed after a fire. Folks like Costi contend the science behind that explanation doesn't add up and believe it was an explosion that brought it down. He says he doesn't condone the graffiti, but could see why it keeps popping up.
There's somebody who's frustrated that the story isn't getting out.
The controversial graffiti can be spotted in places that are pretty tough to reach by the average person.
The folks that are doing this are using some kind of specialized equipment, rappelling harnesses, etc.
Risky moves by vandals put more than just their own safety at risk.
They're putting the public at risk if they fall or something falls. You have cars below, people below. And then you're putting our staff at risk because we have to go out there and deal with it.
DOT crews work on cleaning up the graffiti only when pressing issues are resolved. One thing is certain, the graffiti has people talking and wondering.
If there's some sort of truth that needs to be revealed that we haven't seen yet, I would be open to that.
I don't have a problem with it.
And others are just tired of the mess.
Whoever created this
type of environment should really look at the damage.
We may not know who's doing it, but DOT says the sooner they get it painted, then it just pops up again.
There are places for people to express
Resistance
their
is
opinions and
futile.
beliefs. Vandalizing state infrastructure.
All right, so anyway, the people out there are, I think, more receptive to the idea. They want to ask questions. I think if you hear this from the package, that the, let me see, let me give them credit. Was it KHO? CBS News, no, it was in Hartford, Connecticut. Their local affiliates there. ABC, CBS, NBC, one of those. They're all the same, some mainstream media package, but I thought that it was pretty fair, unbiased. I thought that they could have really taken it over the top and made people seem like they were domestic terrorists for daring to do this, and that this is causing distractions and killing babies on the highway, because I've seen those kind of hit pieces before. And I think that this is definitely a shift in the mood. I think that more and more people are questioning the official stories from 9/11 to what happened with the 2008 crash, Libya. A lot of people, thanks to some in the right that have decided to take the conspiratorial angle, like Glenn Beck, have been able to put a lot of questions in the minds of moderates and conservatives, and a lot of different parallels between the mid-'80s and what's happening now in the alternative media outlets is comparable. It is my opinion that, of course, there is absolutely a grand conspiracy behind what happened on September 11th, 2001. And it's not all that shocking if you put it in global context into history. It doesn't really seem that abnormal, though, at the time when you put the personal emotions into what happened on that fateful day. Now, the administration is trying its best to, of course, hide all of those truths that, well, we might have helped bin Laden, and yeah, he was a CIA asset. And actually, looking at some stuff last night, I see that Wikipedia and others have kind of scrubbed some of those connections between Zygmunt Brzezinski, who told the Le Nouvel Observateur, you can still find this in a 1998 interview with a French magazine, obviously, where a man questioned Mr. Brzezinski, who said, he questioned saying, quote, "The former director of the CIA, Robert Gates, stated in his memoirs, From the Shadows," nice place to be, that American intelligence services began to aid the Mujahideen in Afghanistan 6 months before the Soviet intervention. In this period, you were the national security advisor to President Carter. You therefore played a role in this affair. Is that correct, Brzezinski? He says, yes, according to the official version of the history, CIA aid to the Mujahideen began during 1980, that is to say, after the Soviet army invaded Afghanistan on the 24th of December, 1979, but the reality secretly guarded until now is completely otherwise. Indeed, it was the July 3rd, 1979 date that the president signed the first directive for secret aid to the opponents of the pro-Soviet regime in Kabul. And so much so, I mean, this is pretty much mainline history. And I mentioned this earlier about Reagan. I forgot that he had, and this is a funny note, he actually dedicated a space shuttle to the Mujahideen. So, people debate, I guess, how much involvement the U.S. had in this grand plan. And, of course, always Cui Bono, who benefits here. Cui Bono is I think, only one way to look at it, though, because just because the people that wanted it to happen, just because they benefited, doesn't mean that they actually made this happen, that they actually conspired to create this event. But when it comes to the smoking guns of 9/11, there's not a lot of debate that can really happen around some of the physical, scientific evidence. World Trade Center 7, obviously, falling into its own basement on that fateful day, leaves many, thousands, millions lingering with questions. So I don't have all of the answers to the world's problems, nor do I have the complete guide to 9/11, because there's so much of that has been disproven. There's so many different claims, and people get so attached to their different pet peeve conspiracies that to really have the debate in the alternative media fan community is almost moot, because then it's really not about whether or not there is direct repercussions, direct involvement by people in the U.S. government. If our tax dollars funded this operation, then it just gets into which is your favorite way to find the answer to what happened. Do you think it was mini nukes? Do you think it was this? Do you think it was that? Were there planes? Were there holograms? And that's where that debate lies. And, well, really, like so many other things, it doesn't matter. And not to say that, you being right doesn't matter or me being right doesn't matter, but we can all agree to the majority of things, I think, and really trying to find all of the different little tiny angles that make your theory and my theory different. And pointing all of those out is kind of I don't know, I wouldn't call it a waste of time, but it definitely takes a lot of resources and energy. Anyway, I do want to thank a few people for the show before we move forward. I've got a lot of other things I want to get into. Metal manipulation. I do want to talk about Adam Kokesh, the UK porn filter, and some of these other things like the United Nations mulling the use of mercenaries. But I want to thank the people that do invest in the show, and we're already here past the halfway point. I want to thank Agnes in London, the United Kingdom. She gave us $50. No note, but she did thank us for the continuation of putting good information out there. So she said, thanks for keeping the news going. Carol in Mishawaka, Indiana, threw in $5. And we got a listener email from Eugene. There's a couple other small donations that are reoccurring, and I want to thank all of those people and the other information attributes, people that give us news. We're trying to give all of those credits in the show notes on the Spreaker channel. So we'll put up those notes for those people that have helped us. But I didn't want to touch upon this because of all of the, I think, race baiting that most people have been watching in the mainstream media with the whole Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman trial and what that has done, and that has reinvigorated this conversation that should happen, that needs to happen in this country. So Eugene writes us, recently I came across this really interesting website that I didn't have high expectations for upon finding it. It's something like the counterpart to the BET or Black Voices like the Huffington Post. I guess Black Voices might be a thread on the Huffington Post. Raw Story has one, the Angry Black Lady. So there are those kind of niche blogs. The host of the website wrote this book called Murdering Multiculturalism. He said he picked up a copy and he really thought it was diplomatic and interesting as it points out the perspective of how at least the perspective of how and why America has been destroyed through cultural diversity. And so I went to the website and I checked it out, and you can do it as well if you'd like, thewhitevoice.com. I thought that there was some pretty good content on the website as far as looking at the hypocrisy of creating different laws for different races of people. And it brought me back to a headline that I saw this week in this ongoing debate in Israel, whether the Bedouin people should be exported and have their citizenship stripped from them as taxpayers of Israel because, well, the Israeli government is very racist and violent and not a big fan of multiculturalism at all. They are, by many metrics, just as racist and violent as other, and definitely a country that has a diplomatic final solution for what that they would like to see. That is just rounding up black people and anybody that doesn't fit the mold of their superior race, and they just extradite them. And mass roundups of people seem to be this norm. And for some reason, people in this country think that that's A-OK. So that's not racist, but we need to have a discussion about race in this country. People in Europe are not excited about it, and there's an ongoing debate about whether they're going to continue to aid and fund the Israeli government, and boycotts and some high-profile discussion is definitely happening on the European continent about these actions. So it brings me back to this website, and I didn't clip the guy's name here, but you can check it out. I mean, there's a lot of angles that they take, looking at white guilt, race relations. The idea that white people have this super privilege in 2013 over other races, and I'm sure in some places that there are definitely inequalities, but I've always argued over and over again that it's always socioeconomics. Yes, these same laws that were created to make certain races special and to basically dehumanize groups of people to make it okay to enslave them. You've seen that throughout history. Okay, you could take America and our little melting pot here and ignore it for a moment and just look at other places where there was forced multiculturalism. I mean, there's a lot of people that weren't really thrilled at the time in the mid to late 1800s, where we saw these huge influxes of Catholics, Irish, Jewish, Eastern European people into places like Boston, New York City, and others that have become multicultural, diverse areas, probably the most in the nation. People weren't real thrilled with that idea, the prospect of having all these damn Irishmen here. You give it a few hundred years, and people usually, without too much problems, get along and move along for the most part, and find more reasons why they want to work with each other rather than isolate each other. But anyway, when you get back to multiculturalism and what we see today in America, sure, it is absolutely true that if you try to be prideful and white and European and you tout your history, you could be a hate criminal. You could be a thought criminal, and it's very unpopular and impolitically correct to talk about white pride. People immediately think that you want to throw people in ovens, and that is because there is this full spectrum dehumanization that has happened. And what's actually the most ironic portion of this is now the whole race issue has come full circle, where every race of people feel that they are victimized. So to better my point, I think that it's important to remember the past and our heritage. There's nothing wrong with being proud of it, but it's not something that I hang my hat on. I don't want to go meet with other people that want to talk about our white heritage, because I have a Hispanic wife, and I don't think my children would be welcomed. And I think that it's really hard to sit there and, most of us in this country, to define ourselves by our ethnicity. It's such a monochromatic look. Are you white, black, Asian, Pacific Islander? Do you fit into one of these boxes? Because the government would like to put you into a box, and we can talk about your European heritage or whatever it may be. I just think that is, by saying monochromatic, it's very limited. Like, I understand why you need to have physical definitions or identifiers for people, right? It's a black man, 6'2", that robbed the store, or a white man, 5'4", that stole your money. Whatever it may be. Insert your own situation where maybe somebody needs to identify you. Yeah, knowing the color, the pigmentation of your skin is important, but at the same time, it's something that in the future I think will be less and less of an issue, because we do have the natural melting pot here in this country, and sooner or later these very old and limited definitions by which we define ourselves will not be all that relevant any longer. So to me, it's like, well, you can definitely point it out. And yeah, I think that it is absolutely an injustice that we have things like the NAACP that create special legislation that treats one race different than another. And then we just debate. Then the debate just becomes, well, who's better or who gets the shaft or who deserves what. Okay, you over there, you're this color, you deserve these rules. You get special rules because of your pigmentation. You get special rules and privileges because of lack of pigmentation. That is what has been ongoing for the last 3 months on the mainstream media, and that is this constant victimization, people internalizing and feeling that these injustices are their own, rather than looking at the real injustices that are happening in this country, the real problems that we have. And believe you me, I mean, I'll be completely honest. I don't have a black person problem. I don't have a Mexican person problem. Most of the people that are stealing my money and going to war and taking this country in the direction that I do not like look very, 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 very much like me. So I don't think that I can find too many things with some of those folks that I have in common. So it's not to say that it's not a valid point. I think it absolutely is a valid point. These discussions need to happen. I appreciate Eugene thinking, or at least saying in the email, that he thought that I would be a good ambassador. I don't think I'm going to interview the guy because really most of these points are moot, and most of them are just geared to show me the obvious, and that is that that government and the laws have been created to keep us separated and unequal. And really, if you just go back to the Constitution, which says that all men under the law are created equally, then you don't have any of all of the rest of that legislation, all of these other rules, and all of this political correctness is it's popular because of the time. It's popular because it's now. We haven't got to the point where we can pass we still have the pain from generations before. And there's going to be a point in time where that pain subsides, where people forget, and where it's no longer a pressing issue of the day. And I know that that's probably not a great summation for some people out there that want more, but I don't want to limit or define myself by something as archaic as looking at my pigmentation. And I think that we could really progress past that. But but not directly addressing issues like this leads people to start down this path where we think, well, these people get these special privileges, and that's okay because we used to have these special privileges, so let's just try to make it all equal. And that's really the whole socialist model, isn't it? Redistributing wealth and privilege to different groups based upon central planning and identification. So, anyway, let's lighten it up. You know what I like? I like people that say stupid things on TV, and I'm sure some of you do as well.
The temperatures change really quickly.
This is the global warming. Before, let me just predicate this by saying this is the global warming debate, and this is more propaganda that's being used, I think, ineffectually against people, trying to give them, not in this case white guilt, but energy guilt. Oh, you turn on too many lamps, now you feel guilty. Now you are an eco-criminal. Not a thought criminal, but an eco-criminal. So this is pretty funny because the pontification on on the part of the guy here, and he's just deeply in thought. This is where, the propaganda goes wrong.
The temperatures change really quickly. Those are the ones that are going to be in the most trouble.
Now, extinctions, I don't have to tell you, have been part of the natural history of the world for millennia. And man-made extinctions have even happened before. I guess we hunted the dildo into extinction. But the dodo, rather. Forgive me. I'm having trouble with my words.
Yeah, me too. I understand completely having trouble with words, doing this monologue for 2 hours. I feel you, buddy. We didn't hunt the dildo into extinction. I think it's only becoming more and more popularized by the day. We're hunting the male man out of extinction and replacing it with dildos. Not just the physical ones, but people that are absolute dildos. All right, let's talk about this aluminum scandal. Let's talk about Goldman Sachs. We found out this week that they actually have over 4,500 separate entities underneath it. So let's talk about the metal manipulation. Many of you remember Diocletian. He was a Roman. And the one thing that I attributed him for, people attribute all sorts of things to him because he left his mark on history. I always look at the fact that he was salting the coins and making all of those nice round silver coins less valuable by the moment. Goldman has been able to do something very similar with the manipulation process, and we have a nice guy here from Current TV, which is going to afford us a little bit of the backstory. If you didn't hear about the metals manipulation this week, this is a good example of how you can manipulate the metals markets. And, of course, if it's something like aluminum, thank you, Alcoa, thank you, fluoride smelting, sodium fluoride creating industry, something like this is not just happening in aluminum. Look up GATA, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, and they are on top of many other manipulations. Here's one.
Crazy story about aluminum. Goldman Sachs decided that they were going to buy Metro International Trade Services. They're in the aluminum business. And they were going to do something fascinating. Basically, they were going to slow down how quickly they got aluminum to the end users like the beer companies, Coca-Cola, etc. And by doing that, they would make billions of dollars. How? All right, let me explain. So first of all, when they bought them, there was about 50,000 tons of aluminum in 2008 that they stored. This company did, right? By 2010, they had made that 850,000 tons, and now it's 1.5 million tons. Now, why are they bothering to store so much aluminum, and how? Well, it turns out the more aluminum that they have access to, the more they can control the markets. And in fact, they give incentives for people to store the aluminum in their warehouses up to $230 extra per ton. So people go, okay, fine, take my aluminum. But they're losing money with those incentives. How are they going to make it up? Well, this is how they're going to make it up. They have 27 industrial warehouses in the Detroit area, and they move about 1,500 pound bars of metal each day. But they don't move them from the warehouses to the end user. No, they move them warehouse to warehouse to warehouse. They keep moving in between those 27 warehouses. And guys that work in the area, interviewed by the New York Times, they say, look, we suit up, it's a job, man, but we say hi to each other on the way to the warehouses, and then we go back, and we're going in circles and circles and circles. So what's the result of that? 3 years ago, before Goldman Sachs had bought this company, the amount of time that it took for someone who had bought aluminum to actually receive their shipment was 6 weeks. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Today,
so anyway, this goes all the way to the cost per can, per soda, per juice, and it is pretty phenomenal how these trickle-down costs reach the end user. If you drink a lot of soda water, you're probably paying more than somebody who drinks just water, but anyway, it shows you how these things can be manipulated, and just by saying, well, we just can't get it to you, you're just going to have to wait a little bit more, creates more demand and brings up prices. So that's just a little example of that. Common Dreams broke down this pretty interesting example of how Goldman operates, and I think that this is even more shocking. They have over 4,000 separate entities, and 739 companies are based in the Cayman Islands. So they have definitely expanded their empire to the nth degree. They're not just manipulating the aluminum markets, they are manipulating our politically elected leaders as well as other commodities, other physical markets. Here's an example of how they've pushed on when others have failed. Under siege, J.P. Morgan is going to be quitting the physical commodity market. Reuters reported that J.P. Morgan and Chase Company is exiting physical commodities trading, the bank said in a surprise statement on Friday. So many of you were probably shocked to see that they wanted to get out of trading raw materials and other commodities because of regulatory pressure. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to have one of these other 739 corporate entities or the 4,000 separate corporate entities that they have, 739 of which, is in the Cayman Islands, still in the physical commodities market, or these people on behalf of Goldman Sachs working to help J.P. Morgan. So why, physically enter the market when you can just bet with one of these other companies? Not to put both of them together, but if you're J.P. Morgan, you can easily get into the metals market without actually having to physically hold. And I think that there's so much illegality that's happening, so many shady things that are happening in those markets right now, of course, with all of the suppression of prices and the like, that there is a huge amount of pressure. So that's why they're exiting. So there's your Goldman Sachs, your manipulated world update, showing how these little scams, and that's what they are, they're scams, where they create billions of dollars for themselves out of nothing, that giving no benefit to society, producing no products other than manipulations that create money. All right, so I did want to mention Adam Kokesh. I haven't talked about him actually on this show, and he's had an ongoing saga. He's a alternative media guy who has been attributed to the anarchist movement and the voluntarist movement. He was arrested and raided, his home raided, just a few weeks ago. He was charged with openly carrying a shotgun in the D.C. Freedom Plaza. And if you saw the video on the 4th of July, he went to the Freedom Plaza, which is a pretty ironic name, isn't it? Not too much freedom there. And he loaded a shotgun, recorded this on YouTube, uploaded it, and he was then raided by the government. So if you go to the Economic Policy Journal or blacklistednews.com, you can look at the full affidavit here. I think it's notable, and we should talk about it for a moment, because when you get into civil disobedience, you really should think about what you are doing and some of the repercussions of this. I think currently he's still in jail. He has a $5,000 bail that is bail requirement that I think he's trying to get money for. But basically, they gave him a felony arrest for not just his loading of this weapon, but also for having marijuana, ammunition, magic mushrooms, and other suspected narcotics, whatever that means. I don't know. Almost everything is a suspected narcotic these days. And that could mean anything. They just found something that they thought was a roach, and it's suspected, or they found a pipe, and you never know. It could be crack they're smoking. But anyway, back to the point here, Adam Kokesh is somebody who has become very popular because of what he has done on his YouTube channel, being very provocative with statements. He planned this rally to Washington on July 4th, where people were going to have an armed march to the D.C. area, which, of course, is possibly, according to their own district of criminal law system there, illegal. I don't think that it is, but my opinion of the law, my legal interpretation doesn't necessarily or really at all affect how police officers in Washington, D.C. will treat you. So my opinion is only valued in this podcast form and not in any courtroom. But my opinion about this way to promote yourself is kind of, I guess, twofold. You get a lot of notoriety and popularity by saying very outlandish things. I've been accused, and I will take the shock jock label that people put on this show, because I do say things that are provocative and inflammatory for complete entertainment and show purposes, just to get people to stop and listen for a moment. Sometimes you have to scream. I do use the things that I learned in the locker room from coaches sometimes in the show to get people's attention. But when you bring a lot of attention to yourself for doing things that are borderline criminal under the current justice system, you're going to get a lot of people that are very impressed. And when you have civil disobedience being done on YouTube, people are going to watch and they are going to applaud. And I do as well when people are out there, really bringing attention to the issues and topics of the day. Although grandstanding and trying to bring yourself popularity and, feeding your own ego can land you in a bad way. And I'm not saying that that's what happened with Mr. Kokesh, but you have to be prepared for those repercussions. And if you piss off the state over and over again, they're going to come to your house and they're going to raid it. They're going to kick in your door. And if you have any contraband, they are going to use that against you. Perfect example is the guy, I'm trying to think of his name. It's Barry. Well, he was the Never Get Busted Again guy, Barry Cooper. And he was busting cops by setting up these grow houses that had some lights, put some high-pressure sodium lights there, put them on a timer, and just would let them go for a few weeks to see if the police would come and bust these, and they would, because they are legally using thermal imaging and other illegal tactics that are unconstitutional to profile and to justify and get these faux warrants. And so after busting a few of these police departments, he was attacked, and he's actually now left the country very quietly. Mind you. So when you take on the state will definitely take you on. When you get the interest of the state, especially in those regards, they are going to do everything they can to drop you down a peg. So you have to be prepared for that. And I just don't think that Adam Kokesh was. Obviously, didn't think about the long-term effects of what would happen by doing this, and maybe short-sighted or just ill-prepared for the repercussions, facing a lot of felonies. I mean, one thing I would say is make sure you don't have any hallucinogenic or felonious drugs in your home. Eat all the Xanax, eat all the magic mushrooms you have, whatever you have there. I don't know, Dilatas, whatever you got, you better eat it, and you better do a clean sweep. Because, and just like anything, just like all of these examples, it's not, you have a gun. Oh, you got a gun and drugs. Ooh. You can have a drug and all the whiskey in the world, and it's not a big headline. You got some illicit drugs, got some magic mushrooms. That becomes a huge story. So, I wish the best to him. I don't wish him any ill will, but I do look at these stories and these people and say, hey, there's a lesson to be learned. And if we can't learn from others out there practicing civil disobedience, then we're not learning anything. All right. So, I'm completely agnostic on Adam Kokesh. I do think that a lot of it was grandstanding, though, and trying to bring attention. And a lot of other people in the alternative media have made themselves famous by getting themselves arrested. And that is a common tactic used as a way to show somebody is a patriot or to prove that they are, dangerous, that they're willing to take on the state. And I've seen other more popular radio show hosts and the ilk on both sides of the aisle, from alternative media to mainstream, that have done this. From Amy Goodman getting arrested, having her hair pulled, to a Code Pink lady that was chastising Obama just a few weeks ago. It's a way to bring attention to yourself, and it's a way to get people looking at you and your cause. But you have to be prepared for the repercussions. Speaking of which, if you want a safe and cushy world where you don't get any information, well, you can move to the UK. They have a new porn filter. It'll be instituted at the end of the year if all plans are a go. This week, Prime Minister David Cameron announced the porn filter. It's a crusade to have adult material censored. But what does that mean? Oh, well, there you go. It means beyond just porn, drugs and alcohol and tobacco. So maybe you can't get to Adam Kokesh's site because he says something about weed on there. Gambling. Maybe you like to talk about the ponies and what they're doing. Social networking, suicide, self-harm, hate. All of those things can be easily attributed to your website or my website or this podcast, to be quite honest. It's such a subjective filter that you have to wonder, well, how do they plan on instituting it? And how is this going to affect the people? Now, in the UK, I mean, they're talking about knife laws, knife legislation. It's out of control. But it's interesting to see who the government is working with to build their porn filter. And this has actually come under some scrutiny because it's a company you may not have heard of, but they're Chinese.
If you're concerned about the decline of American economic power and the rise of China, then there's no better case study than Huawei. Chances are you've never heard of this Chinese technology giant, but in the space of 25 years, it's become the largest manufacturer of telecommunications equipment in the world. Everything from smartphones to switchers and routers that form the backbone of the global communications network. It's an industry the U.S. invented and once dominated, but no more. Now, Huawei is aggressively pursuing a foothold in the United States, hoping to build the next generation of digital networks here. It's prompted an outcry in Washington and a year-long investigation by the House Intelligence Committee that's raised concerns about national security, Chinese espionage, and Huawei's murky connections to the Chinese government.
Yeah, so we're going to have a Chinese filter because Huawei is building the filter. CBS notes the Chinese telecom firm's Huawei's role in the UK porn filter scrutinized by reports. Concerns over who controls what content gets censored in Britain's ban on pornography have come to light in a recent report by the BBC. How insane is this? Okay, UK, wake up. Okay, are you going to allow the Chinese to determine what websites you get to, along with David Cameron and the conservative MP parties or whatever they are over there, your lords? Give me a break. Okay, who's this protecting? Who is this going to serve? Now, if you want porn, you can still get porn. You just have to be the kind of person that's going to admit that you want porn. Then you're going to have to say, well, I do want hate crime stuff because I still want to go to blacklistednews.com and they dare talk about race issues or maybe a non-politically correct conversation about religion. You know, beep boop, beep boop. Chinese people don't like that. So there's two ways to look at this. Number one, to what degree and who will your government work with to create this? I mean, what a great metaphor for the UK, allowing the same people that brought you the great firewall of China oppressing the people, now providing you with the filtering for your ISP. So hopefully, I mean, I think a lot of this is going to blow up. They've still got 4 months and a few days to stymie this, and this might be the one thing that throws David Cameron and his party off the fiscal cliff. Not to mention the fact that they're bankrupting the country. We could talk about that for hours, but no one's even noticed in this country that the U.S. federal debt has apparently exceeded the legal limit. Remember, we used to have these discussions about the debt ceiling, and then they proposed that they would just allow it to continue to ever expand. Well, we have passed the $16,669,396,000,000 point, and that has been the same sticking point, the same number for 68 straight days, according to the daily Treasury statement on the 24th. So apparently that's only half of the story, and that is, well, the best part, and that is that we have had to have exceeded this number, but nobody's addressed this issue. So they're just either taking money out of the federal pension plan, which they've said that they would do often. Timothy Geithner and now Jack Lew is doing this under his proposed plans. It's amazing that nobody's noticed this. It's amazing that they're just completely ignoring the fact that we have already passed this point. So there you go. I don't know what else to say about that other than we are operating in very dangerous times where the government has no accountability whatsoever, and it doesn't even matter what the debt limit is. Of course, it has to be going higher. Every day, the government spends upwards of, I think, $10 to $50 billion. Don't quote me on that, but they spend a lot of money. A lot of money. You know, we've been talking about war and who we are fighting, and we talked about Syria, what's happening in Iraq, 3,000 dead. I think this ProPublica piece really does point out how ludicrous this whole system is. Who we are at war with is classified. The American people have no idea who we are at war with. President Barack Obama said in a speech just a few weeks back that, quote, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and their associated forces are who we are at war with. Senator Carl Levin, we played the clip earlier of him questioning Dempsey, General Dempsey, asked, who are these Al-Qaeda affiliates? It's a good question. We're fighting the Taliban, which I don't think we're really fighting. We're just enriching their pockets with money. Al-Qaeda? Do I need to go there? But who's the associated forces? It's top secret. You can't know about it. So, I mean, think about this. The American people are okay with fighting a war with no designated enemy, with no one really. I mean, it could be you. You could be the associated force. I could be the associated force. Who knows? Don't plan on the NSA keeping you safe. There was a big vote for Big Brother, the Big Brother big vote this week, and that got a little bit of attention here. It turns out that the 217 no votes on the Amash bill, were getting twice as much campaign financing from the defense and intelligence industry as the 205 yes voters. So we definitely have a divided government on the NSA racketeering and spying that's happening. NSA phone spying dragnet is highly unpopular. The people themselves, though we do, according to polls, accept this. they're like, it's okay. The people are not thrilled with it, but we accept it. That was what the conclusion was, that even though most people are opposed to NSA spying, they tolerate it to a certain degree. But it's really interesting. Who are the big players? Who's making money besides Huawei, the Chinese telecoms? Overall political action committees and employees from the defense intelligence firms such as Lockheed Martin, Boeing, United Technologies, Honeywell International, and others ponied up $12.97 million in donations for the 2-year period ending in December 31st, 2012. So you just have to follow the money. It's really easy to see who's lobbying your government. And this is the LA Times article I referenced. Americans believe anti-terror programs go too far, but they support them anyway. Americans believe that government surveillance programs collect far too much information, and that the recent leaks of classified data indicate that they are increasingly worried that the scope of the anti-terror programs has endangered civil liberties, though they don't mind. Well, anyway, I wanted to mention this. I know that we're running up against the clock here. Moreover, people are worried about the NSA and, of course, all of the telecommunications companies spying on them. I'm actually going to be I'm going to try an experiment and try to completely go wireless and just over a Wi-Fi, phoneless, but just using a Wi-Fi-enabled device. I haven't decided on which one. iPod Touch is a good example of a device that can pretty much do everything you want it to do, except it doesn't have to be on a telecommunications plan. And with almost ubiquitous Wi-Fi networking, there's almost no reason that you need a phone any longer to receive information. And so I really think that that's the first step in boycotting some of the larger telecoms, although, of course, bandwidth and data and all of those things go over those same major providers. But it's something that I'm going to experiment with, and if nothing else, it'll save me about $120 a month or whatever this phone bill is, the combined bill with my wife on the plan, with text messaging and all those other wonderful, wonderful things that we pay for. But it's the first step, or it's just another progression in my ongoing experiment, which is trying to get off of many of the different day-to-day things that you're addicted to. Getting off of not the grid, but just getting out of the habit of using technologies that really have no value. Microwave, television, and now cell phone. There's just no need for it to know where I'm at. And I don't know about the iPod Touch. I'm sure I'll get some feedback on from people saying, well, that thing, anywhere it goes, it's constantly giving your geographical location. So I'm interested in looking into that as well, and appreciate feedback from all of you techies, geeks, and gurus that always email me and let me know where I have fallen astray. But you get the basic idea that you could use Skype, which is being monitored by the NSA, or any other device or program software that you can use on these devices. They'll probably go Android because it's more open source. But anyway, let's just talk about the Big Brother database, and I think that's where we'll leave it. There's some other things I would like to get into. Of course, the Pentagon deploying blimps over Washington, D.C., California now issuing smart digital plates. They're going to try the 3-year test pilot program with 160,000 cars. It's going to be used easily as a tracking mechanism for, not just the cops, but other companies as well. Anybody with a camera. Privacy advocates are not thrilled about them. And, some of the more hilarious things in Big Brother news that happened this week. The NSA claiming that due to its antiquated system, it can't receive or even query its own emails. But the CIA can, get into computers worldwide. They have the high-tech hacking teams. You would imagine that these teams that can provide offensive systems to attack networks could somehow figure out how to maybe query a database. But anyway, people are really worried about Big Brother, and they should be, but most of them aren't looking at where they are most susceptible and where most of the information is going to be coming from, and that is from Obamacare, the Big Brother database that's bigger than the NSA dragnet. As Obamacare, according to Rare Magazine here, the train wreck begins to gather steam. There is increasing concern in Congress over something called the Federal Data Services Hub. The Data Hub is a comprehensive database of personal information being established by the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, to implement federally facilitated health insurance exchanges. The purpose of the Data Hub, according to the June 2013 Government Accountability Office report, is to provide electronic near real-time access to federal data, to access to state third-party data sources. Yeah, so that's other databases that are being held by private contractors, the military-industrial complex, that verify consumer eligibility information. Do you get your food stamps or not? In these secret domestic surveillance, these days of secret domestic surveillance by the intelligence community, rogue IRS officials as well as state taxing agencies will be using this information for political purposes. Madison Rupert over at In the Lie broke this down as well and said that the Federal Services Data Hub, mysterious centralized database, will contain tons of your private data, tons of it. While many news outlets are discussing the exposure of the NSA surveillance programs, far fewer are discussing the Federal Data Services Hub. Stephen Parente, financial professor at the University of Minnesota, and Paul Howard, director of the Manhattan Institute Center for Medical Progress, wrote that Data Hub could be the largest consolidation of personal data in the history of the Republic. So there's a lot of other honorable mention stories here, but nothing takes the cake. I mean, when it comes to your personal information, your health care, which is not affordable. I don't know if any of you have tried to buy affordable health care in the last few months, but I was looking into a plan personally for myself as a 35-year-old male, and you'll be hard-pressed to find anything under the $400 range annually, or monthly. Most of the quotes from Blue Cross Blue Shield that I received were upwards of over $500 with huge deductibles, $2,500 and up, so you don't get any compensation until you already hit that $2,500 mark. It's flabbergasting and so frustrating because you know that, well, if you don't pay this, you're going to be charged with your $900 fee, I think it is, by Obamacare and the 16,500 new IRS employees that will be, well, politicizing your health records. So, it's just crazy. It's crazy. Also, just talking about health for a moment, and we'll end with this. If you didn't hear about this hacker who died, he was about to go to the Black Hat Convention this coming Wednesday in Las Vegas, which should be pretty interesting. Keith Alexander, the NSA Chief General, has this hackathon. This is where you get your jobs if you want to go and work for the Millplex. But RT broke this down a little bit. Hacker dies before he was to reveal how to remotely kill pacemaker patients. And, Dick Cheney was grabbing his. A security researcher, Barnaby Jack, has passed away in San Francisco only days before a scheduled appearance at a Las Vegas hacker conference where he intended to show how ordinary pacemakers could be compromised in order to kill men. Jack had previously presented hacks involving ATMs and insulin pumps, and we talked about that here on Blacklisted Radio, the insulin pumps, at the annual Black Hat Conference in Vegas. And this is an ongoing conference, an annual one. I think it's in its seventh year. I have to double check that. It's pretty. I think that people want to look at it from a conspiratorial angle. And it's pretty interesting and very compelling in that angle. But just the technology that he was talking about and the ability to do this is it's a real issue, because more and more of the devices that we're inserting into our bodies that we're going to rely on in this new medical world order are going to have these remote capabilities. And, well, we saw with Michael Hastings and others the resurrection of this debate over, hackable electronics, and it's really not in the public's view. There's a lot of plausible deniability out of it. But it shouldn't surprise you that, these things are going to be happening more and more and more, not just the hackathons, but more and more of these people that are trendsetters that are bringing very, very dangerous pieces of information to us might see their untimely demise. All right, guys and gals, I want to thank you so much for being part of the show today. I've got more. We're going to have to do some more of these podcasts impromptu during the week. Of course, I'm always chomping at the bit. And, of course, we need your support. Continue to support us by supporting us with your voice, letting people know about the show and what we do here. And until next week, everybody have a great week. Hope you truck on through and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Until next time, take care.